Hello everyone, and welcome to the Ben 10 What Ifs. So we are back with an interesting movie on what if Ben 10 found the forbidden Omnitrix core, power of lost dimensions DanMachi. But before we start, I just want to remind you to please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you enjoy my content. Let's start the story. Dimensions Beyond. The Forbidden Core. Chapter 1. The Core Awakens. The desert air shimmered with heat as Ben Tennyson crouched behind a weathered boulder, squinting against the harsh New Mexico sun. 3 years had passed since his 18th birthday when Azimuth had presented him with the completed Omnitrix, no longer a prototype, no longer limited by previous constraints. At 21, Ben had grown taller, leaner, his jaw more defined and his green eyes sharper with experience. The playful teenager remained somewhere in the quirk of his smile, but years of interstellar conflict had honed him into something more formidable. "Gwen, I'm at the coordinates," Ben whispered into his communicator, voice low and steady. "Whatever crashed here last night is just ahead, but I'm picking up energy signatures unlike anything we've encountered." His cousin's voice crackled through the device. "Be careful, Ben. The readings we're getting are off the charts. Kevin says it's not matching any known technology." "When has that ever stopped me?" Ben replied, his confidence not bravado but the earned certainty of someone who had saved the universe multiple times. He peered over the boulder at the small impact crater 30 yards ahead. At its center lay a metallic object no larger than a softball, pulsing with an otherworldly blue glow that seemed to bend the very air around it. The desert floor had crystallized into glass where it had made contact, suggesting temperatures that should have incinerated the object itself. Ben activated the Omnitrix with practiced precision, cycling through his alien roster before selecting chromastone. The transformation washed over him in a flash of emerald light, skin hardening into crystalline violet material, his human form restructuring into the crystalline alien capable of absorbing and redirecting energy. "If that thing decides to explode, better to have some protection," he muttered to himself, his voice now resonant and echoing. He approached cautiously, each footstep deliberate. The strange object pulsed more rapidly as he drew near, its blue glow intensifying in rhythm almost like a heartbeat. Up close, Ben could see it wasn't simply metal, the surface seemed fluid yet solid simultaneously, covered in symbols that shifted and changed as he watched. "Gwen, are you seeing this?" Ben transmitted visual data through his communicator. "The markings look almost like Galvan script," came Azimuth's unexpected voice through the communicator. "But corrupted, modified. Tennyson, do not touch that artifact." Ben froze, surprised by the creator of the Omnitrix joining the call. "Azimuth, what is it?" "Something that shouldn't exist in this dimension," the Galvan genius replied, alarm evident in his typically impassive voice. "Step back immediately. I'm sending Paradox to retrieve it." But as Ben began retreating, the object suddenly levitated, emitting a high-pitched whine that made his crystalline form vibrate painfully. Concentric rings of blue energy pulsed outward, and the artifact shot toward him with impossible speed. "Ben!" Gwen's voice shouted through the communicator. Acting on instinct honed through countless battles, Ben crossed his arms to absorb the energy, but instead of the expected impact, the object halted inches from his chest, hovering before the Omnitrix symbol. The Omnitrix itself began to glow in response, green light pulsing in counterpoint to the artifact's blue. "Tennyson, transform into something else, now," Azimuth commanded. Ben slapped the Omnitrix symbol, intending to become XLR8 and dash away, but nothing happened. The symbol sparked, a feedback loop forming between it and the mysterious object. "The Omnitrix isn't responding," Ben shouted, attempting to physically back away, but found himself frozen in place, caught in some invisible field emanating from the artifact. The object suddenly liquefied, transforming into a mercurial substance that spiraled toward the Omnitrix symbol on his chest. When it made contact, pain unlike anything Ben had ever experienced ripped through him, not physical agony but something deeper, as though the very fabric of his being was being rewritten. "Azmuth. What's happening?" he managed through gritted teeth as both the Omnitrix and the strange substance began to merge, green and blue energies swirling together. The last thing Ben heard was Paradox's voice suddenly joining the communication. "Oh dear, we're too late. The Forbidden Core has found him." Then reality itself seemed to fracture around him. The desert, the sky, everything dissolved into prismatic light as Ben felt himself being pulled apart at a molecular level. No, deeper than that, as though the quantum strings of his existence were being unraveled and rewoven into a new pattern. He was falling through dimensions, through realities, glimpses of worlds flashing past his consciousness, worlds where he had never found the Omnitrix, worlds where he had become a conqueror instead of a hero. Worlds where Earth had been destroyed. And through it all, the Omnitrix and the mysterious artifact continued their integration, becoming something new, something beyond Azimuth's design. Ben screamed, but no sound emerged in the void between realities. His consciousness began to fade, overwhelmed by the impossible journey. Until suddenly, mercifully, everything stopped. Cold stone pressed against his back. The air smelled of unfamiliar spices, smoke, and something else, a strange metallic scent unlike anything on Earth. Ben's eyes fluttered open to a night sky filled with stars, arranged in constellations he didn't recognize, and a moon that seemed slightly larger than it should be. He sat up with a groan, human once more, head pounding with the worst migraine of his life. "What happened?" he muttered, voice raspy as though he hadn't used it in days. The Omnitrix on his wrist immediately caught his attention. It had changed, the familiar green and black device now ink. Orperated swirling patterns of blue energy that pulsed beneath its surface. The dial had transformed as well, the holographic interface showing not just his alien transformations but strange new symbols interwoven with them. "That can't be good," Ben whispered, carefully touching the device. It responded to his touch normally but felt different somehow, warmer, almost alive in a way it hadn't been before. As his senses returned fully, Ben realized he was sitting in an alleyway paved with cobblestones, flanked by buildings constructed of stone and wood in an architectural style that appeared medieval but with oddly advanced elements. Pipes and strange crystalline lights lined some of the structures, and from beyond the alley came sounds of a bustling city, voices, laughter, the clatter of might have been horse-drawn carriages mixed with mechanical whirs. "Definitely not Kansas anymore," Ben muttered, shakily standing and brushing off his jacket. He checked his pockets. Phone gone, communicator gone. The only technology he had was the modified Omnitrix. He cautiously approached the alley's entrance, peering out at a scene that confirmed his suspicions. This was no Earth city. The street beyond was wide and bustling even at night, lit by crystalline lamps that glowed with a soft blue light. People, humans, but also beings with animal features, pointed ears, and other non-human characteristics, moved about in clothing that blended medieval design with practical modern elements. And towering above it all, visible even from his limited vantage point, was an immense white structure that rose into the clouds, a building so tall it dwarfed even the largest Earth skyscrapers, with a strange architectural style that seemed to defy physics. Beepered without knowing how he knew the name. The knowledge somehow inserted into his mind during the dimensional transfer. A sudden flash of information flooded his consciousness, fragments of knowledge about this place called Orario. A city built around a structure called the Dungeon, a world with gods and monsters and adventurers. The Forbidden Core, as Paradox had called it, seemed to be downloading information directly into his brain, but in disjointed, incomplete pieces that left him disoriented. Ben staggered, pressing his hand against the cool stone wall for support as his mind struggled to process the alien knowledge. "Okay, first things first," he muttered, centering himself with practiced discipline. "Figure out where, and what, this place is, then find a way to contact home." He stepped out onto the street, immediately drawing curious glances from passers-by. His jeans, green jacket, and black t-shirt clearly marked him as foreign here, where most wore leather, cloth, or light armor. Ben kept his expression neutral, projecting confidence despite his inner turmoil, a skill developed through years of being thrown into alien situations. The street opened into a circular plaza with a fountain at its center, water glowing with a faint magical light. Market stalls lined the perimeter, selling everything from fruits and vegetables to weapons and armor. Many were closing for the night, merchants packing away their wares. But enough remained open to create a vibrant evening scene. Ben approached a fruit vendor, an older woman with kind eyes who looked fully human. "Excuse me," he said, relieved when she seemed to understand his language. though something told him he shouldn't take that for granted. This might sound strange, but could you tell me exactly where I am? The woman gave him a curious look. New to Orario, EH. This is Northwest Maine, just off Central Park. If you're looking for the guild, it's that way. She pointed down a wide avenue leading toward the immense tower. The guild, Ben repeated. Another flash of information surfacing. An organization that regulated adventurers who explored the dungeon, the mysterious labyrinth beneath the city. Thank you. As he turned to leave, the woman called after him. You'll need Valis if you're planning to register as an adventurer. Can't go into the dungeon without proper equipment. Valis. The currency here. Another piece of information slotted into place. Ben nodded in thanks and continued walking, mind racing. This world had a magical dungeon, adventurers who explored it, and a guild that regulated them. It seemed like something from a fantasy game. Yet it was undeniably real. He needed to find someone with more information, someone who might understand what had happened to him. The Omnitrix pulsed on his wrist, drawing his attention. The holographic interface activated without his input, displaying a map of his surroundings with a pulsing dot some distance away. Are you helping me? Ben murmured to the device, receiving a slight warming sensation in response. The Forbidden Core's integration seemed to have given the Omnitrix a greater degree of autonomy, and apparently, a navigational system calibrated to this world. Following the map, Ben navigated through increasingly narrow streets, moving away from the city center. The buildings became more modest, the lighting dimmer, and the crowd thinned until he found himself in a residential district. The Omnitrix led him to a small square where a well sat at the center, its water reflecting the unfamiliar stars above. The pulsing dot on the map indicated something nearby, but as Ben looked around the empty square, he saw nothing unusual. Then a sound caught his attention, a low, rumbling growl unlike any Earth animal. Years of fighting alien threats had honed Ben's reflexes to near perfection. He spun toward the sound, hand already hovering over the Omnitrix, to find himself facing a creature emerging from an impossibly small crack in the cobblestones. It resembled a wolf in the same way a nightmare resembles a dream. The basic structure was recognizable, but everything else was wrong. Its fur was black as oil but seemed to absorb rather than reflect the surrounding darkness. Its eyes glowed red with malevolent intelligence, and its claws left smoking scratches on the stone as it fully emerged, standing nearly as tall as Ben himself. Let me guess, Ben said. Tension coiled in his muscles even as he maintained his characteristic calm. You're not the welcoming committee. The creature snarled, revealing multiple rows of serrated teeth, and lunged with supernatural speed. Ben activated the Omnitrix in one fluid motion, slamming down the dial as the creature's claws slashed through the space where he had stood a moment before. Green light flashed, and where Ben Tennyson had stood, Humungosaur now towered, 9 feet of dinosaur-like alien muscle. But something was different. Energy coursed through his transformed body in unfamiliar patterns, and glowing blue lines traced across his scaled skin, forming intricate patterns that pulsed with power. Whoa, Humungosaur rumbled, looking down at his modified form. That's new. The wolf creature hesitated, red eyes narrowing at the transformed opponent before it. Then it howled, a sound that sent cracks spreading through the nearby walls, and attacked again. Humungosaur met the charge head-on, catching the creature's snapping jaws in his massive hands. The strength he was accustomed to was there, but now augmented by something else, energy that felt similar to mana but more primal. More connected to this world. He felt invincible, power surging through him beyond anything he'd experienced in this form before. With a roar, he lifted the struggling creature and slammed it into the ground. Cobblestones shattering under the impact. Whatever you are, he growled, I've fought worse before breakfast. The wolf creature twisted with impossible flexibility, slashing a Humungosaur's arm with claws that cut even his tough hide. Black ichor dripped from the wounds but evaporated before touching the ground, and the cuts sealed themselves almost instantly, another new ability. Accelerated healing too. I could get used to this, Humungosaur grinned, grabbing the creature by its hind leg as it attempted to circle him. He spun it around and hurled it into a nearby wall with enough force to reduce the structure to rubble. Instead of being incapacitated, the creature exploded into shadowy mist upon impact, then reformed a moment later, its red eyes now blazing with fury. It howled again, And the sound seemed to tear at reality itself. The air rippled, and from the same crack in the cobblestones, two more identical creatures emerged. Of course, Homungosaur muttered. Why face one monster when you can face three? The creatures circled him, moving with coordinated precision that suggested intelligence beyond ordinary animals. Homungosaur increased his size to his full 60 feet. Blue energy lines growing brighter as he expanded. The square was now barely large enough to contain him, buildings creaking dangerously close to his massive form. The creatures attacked simultaneously from different angles. Homungosaur stomped the ground with tremendous force, creating a shockwave that sent two of them flying, but to his surprise, the impact produced not just physical force but a pulse of blue energy that spread outward in a visible wave, crystallizing the cobblestones where it passed. Definitely new, he commented, swinging a massive fist at the third creature as it leapt for his throat. The blow connected with devastating effect, the monster bursting into that strange shadowy mist again, but this time, it didn't reform. A voice cut through the night. Behind you. Homungosaur turned to see a woman standing at the entrance to the square, bow drawn and aimed at one of the remaining creatures as it prepared to pounce from a rooftop. She loosed her arrow, a shaft that glowed with celestial light, and it struck the creature mid-leap, were of golden particles that consumed the monster entirely. The final creature, sensing the change in odds, attempted to flee back toward the crack it had emerged from. Homungosaur slammed his foot down, blocking its escape, then brought his fist down with earth-shattering force. The monster dissolved into shadow, leaving behind a small crystalline stone that glittered with internal light. A magic stone, the woman said, approaching as Homungosaur shrunk back to his more manageable 9-foot height. Those were shadow fangs. They shouldn't be this close to the surface. Her eyes narrowed as she studied his transformed state. And you shouldn't exist at all. Homungosaur took a moment to study her in return. She was tall for a human woman, perhaps 5'10", with midnight blue hair pulled back in a practical braid that reached her mid-back. Her eyes were a striking silver that seemed to reflect starlight, and her features were elegant but marked by a small scar that crossed her right eyebrow. She wore light armor of unfamiliar design, plates that seemed to be made of some iridescent material over dark leather. Practical rather than decorative, though undeniably beautiful in its craftsmanship. The bow she carried looked to be made of the same material as her armor, inlaid with silver symbols that glowed faintly. A sword hung at her hip, and various pouches and tools adorned her belt. Everything about her spoke of competence and experience. I get that a lot, Homungosaur replied, his deep voice rumbling through the ruined square. Thanks for the assist. The woman didn't lower her bow, though she didn't knock another arrow. What are you? You're not a monster from the dungeon. But you're clearly not a normal adventurer either. Homungosaur touched the modified Omnitrix symbol on his chest, transforming back to his human form in a flash of green light. The woman's eyes widened, her bow coming up instinctively before she controlled her reaction. My name is Ben Tennyson, he said, standing unarmed in the middle of the destruction their battle had caused. And I'm very, very far from home. Lyra Andromeda had seen many strange things in her 6 years as a first-class adventurer of the Asteria Familia. She had ventured to the 40th floor of the dungeon, faced monsters that defied description, and witnessed the gods' capricious games firsthand. But never had she seen anything like the creature, no, the man, standing before her. You expect me to believe you're human? She asked, bow still half raised, eyes calculating as she assessed the threat level of this stranger. His transformation had been unlike any magic she knew, instantaneous, complete. Without chanting or visible focus. Mostly human, Ben replied with a half-smile that suggested this wasn't the first time he'd had this conversation. It's the watch that lets me transform. He held up his wrist, showing the strange device with its mix of green and blue energies. Lyra's silver eyes narrowed, focusing on the device. As a member of the Asteria Familia, dedicated to the saint Beauty of celestial and dimensional phenomena, she recognized power beyond ordinary magic when she saw it. That's no magic item I've ever encountered, she said, finally lowering her bow completely but maintaining a careful distance. And those weren't ordinary transformations. The energy signature was all wrong. Ben looked impressed. You can sense energy signatures. My goddess grants her fami. Leah members the ability to perceive cosmic forces, Lyra explained, her tone professional but guarded. Your energy, it doesn't belong in this world. Something in her words sparked recognition in Ben's eyes. This world, so you know I'm not from here. It wasn't a question, but Lyra answered anyway. The Asteria Familia monitors dimensional anomalies. There was a massive disturbance earlier. Tonight, like nothing we've ever recorded. Our seers collapsed from the feedback. Her expression hardened. You were at the center of it. Ben sighed, running a hand through his brown hair. Look, I didn't exactly choose to come here. Something called the Forbidden Core merged with my Omnitrix. He gestured to the watch-like device, and next thing I know, I'm in fantasy land fighting shadow wolves. Shadow fangs. Lyra corrected automatically. Mid-level monsters that shouldn't be on the surface at all. She glanced at the crack in the cobblestones, now sealing itself as the magic stone's energy dissipated. Something's destabilizing the barriers between the dungeon and the city. Let me guess, Ben said with the weariness of someone who'd heard this story before. That something is probably me. Lyra studied him with new interest. Most people would be panicking in his situation, but this Ben Tennyson showed the calm assessment of a seasoned adventurer. Despite his strange appearance, his clothing marked him as foreign even without the transformation. There was something familiar about his demeanor. She had seen it in the eyes of top-class adventurers who had faced death so many times it had become an old acquaintance rather than a fear. Possibly, she admitted, which is why you need to come with me to meet my goddess. Asteria will want to examine that device and determine if you're a threat. Ben tensed subtly, his hand moving slightly closer to the device on his wrist. No offense, but people trying to examine the Omnitrix usually ends badly for everyone involved. I'm happy to talk, but the watch stays with me. The statement wasn't a threat, but Lyra recognized the steel beneath his casual tone. This man would fight rather than surrender his device. Interesting. I said examine, not remove. She clarified. Asteria studies cosmic phenomena. If your Omnitrix is causing dimensional instability, we need to understand it before more monsters break through, or worse. Ben seemed to consider this, green eyes assessing her with surprising intensity. Fair enough, he finally said. Lead the way, but just so we're clear, if anyone tries to take the Omnitrix, I'll show you transformations that make Homungosaur look like a therapy pet. Lyra found herself fighting back a smile at his audacity. Understood. I'm Lyra Andromeda, by the way. First-class adventurer of the Asteria Familia. Quote, Ben Tennyson, wielder of the Omnitrix and apparently interdimensional tourist. He extended his hand in what must be a greeting custom from his world. After a moment's hesitation, Lyra clasped his forearm in the traditional adventurer's greeting of Orario. Ben adapted quickly, returning the gesture with a firm grip. The Asteria Familia compound is on the east side of the city, Lyra said, retrieving the magic stone from where it had fallen. We should move quickly. That disturbance will have attracted attention, and not all of it welcome. As if summoned by her words, voices and footsteps approached the square, the city watch responding to the commotion their battle had caused. Lyra gestured for Ben to follow her down a narrow side street, away from the approaching authorities. The guild imposes hefty fines for property damage, she explained as they navigated the labyrinthine back alleys of Orario. And they would have even more questions about you than I do. Story of my life, Ben muttered, keeping pace with her easily despite the unfamiliar terrain. Causing property damage and answering uncomfortable questions. Lyra led them through increasingly narrow passages, occasionally stopping to ensure they weren't followed. The route was circuitous by design. The Asteria Familia guarded its privacy zealously, and direct approaches to their compound were monitored by both magical and mundane means. As they walked, Lyra observed her strange companion. Despite being in an alien world, he moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to finding himself in unusual situations. His eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, noting exits and potential threats with practiced ease. Whoever he was in his world, Ben Tennyson was no ordinary civilian. Your familia had been walking for some time, breaking the tactical silence. What exactly do they do? Besides monitoring dimensional anomalies, I mean. Lyra considered how much to reveal to this stranger. The Asteria Familia was not secretive about its existence, but many of its activities remained private by necessity. Officially, we're explorers and researchers, she answered carefully. Asteria is the goddess of stars and cosmic phenomena. Her blessing enhances our ability to perceive and interact with forces beyond ordinary magic. We map the dungeon's deeper levels, study monster behavior patterns, and occasionally deal with unusual occurrences, like people dropping in from other dimensions, Ben supplied. You'd be surprised how often it happens, Lyra said, then clarified at his raised eyebrow. Not people specifically, but objects, energy patterns. The dimensions aren't as separate as most believe. The dungeon itself may be a nexus point between realities. This seemed to interest Ben greatly. That could explain why the Omnitrix led me here after the merger with the Forbidden Core. It might have been seeking a power source or stabilization point. Lyra filed that information away for later. Your device has its own intelligence. In a manner of speaking, Ben replied, looking down at the Omnitrix. It was designed by the smartest being in my universe, a Galvan named Azimuth. It has safeguards, protocols, and limited autonomy, but it's not fully sentient. Or at least, it wasn't before merging with this Forbidden Core thing. Hay emerged from the alleyways onto a wider street lined with elegant buildings. Unlike the medieval architecture of the city center, these structures showed a more refined aesthetic, columns of pale stone inlaid with silver, domes of glass that reflected the starlight, gardens visible behind ornate gates. We're entering the Eastern District, Lyra explained, home to several of the more intellectual familias. Ben nodded, taking in the changed surroundings. Nice neighborhood, less likely to be attacked by shadow wolves. Shadowfangs, Lyra corrected again, a hint of amusement in her voice. And yes, most familias maintain protective barriers around their territories. The Eastern District is particularly well defended due to the valuable research conducted here. They approached a circular plaza dominated by a magnificent building that resembled an observatory combined with a classical temple. Silver domes topped with crystal spires rose above colonnaded walkways, and the NT restructure seemed to shimmer with subtle magical energy. Constellations were inlaid in the plaza's stonework, forming patterns that glowed faintly in the darkness. The Asteria Familia compound, Lyra announced, leading Ben toward an entrance flanked by two statues of robed figures holding astrolabes. Our home and research center. Guards in armor similar to Lyra's stood at attention on either side of the entrance. Their expressions neutral but their eyes sharp as they assessed the approaching pair. They tensed visibly at the sight of Ben. Lady Andromeda, one acknowledged with a respectful nod before eyeing Ben suspiciously. This is the source of the anomaly. This is Ben Tennyson, Lyra corrected firmly. A visitor I'm escorting to see the goddess. Please inform her we've arrived. The guards exchanged glances but knew better than to question Lyra's authority. One turned and entered the building while the other remained at attention, hand resting casually near his weapon. They're jumpy, Ben observed quietly. The dimensional disturbance affected our familia more than others due to our attunement to cosmic forces, Lyra explained. Several members collapsed, including our captain. They're right to be cautious. Before Ben could respond, the guard returned and nodded respectfully. The goddess will see you in the celestial chamber. She requests that your guest surrender any weapons before entering. Ben held up his empty hands. Just the clothes on my back and this, he indicated the Omnitrix, which doesn't come off. The guard frowned, but Lyra intervened. The device is bound to him. I'll take responsibility for his actions within our walls. This seemed to satisfy the guard, who stepped aside to allow them entry. Ben followed Lyra into the compound, the doors closing behind them with a resonant sound that suggested more than simple wood and metal, magical barriers activating, perhaps. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior, or a soaring atrium with a ceiling of glass that offered an unobstructed view of the night sky. The walls were lined with bookshelves containing ancient tomes, interspersed with display cases holding artifacts of obvious power and value. Spiral staircases of pale stone connected multiple levels, and adventurers in the distinctive armor of the Asteria Familia moved purposefully throughout the space. Many stopped to stare at Ben as Lyra led him across the atrium and up one of the staircases. Their expressions ranged from curious to hostile, but none interfered with their passage. Your Familia members don't seem thrilled to see me. Ben noted as they reached a landing and continued down a corridor lined with star charts and complex magical diagrams. "You're an unknown variable," Lyra replied matter-of-factly. "Our goddess teaches us to question everything, especially the unexpected. It's not personal. Trust me, I'm used to mixed receptions," Ben said with a wry smile. "Though usual, Lee, I've saved the world at least once before getting the cold shoulder." Lyra glanced at him, trying to determine if he was joking, but his expression suggested otherwise. Just what kind of person was Ben Tennyson in his world? They reached a set of double doors inlaid with silver constellations that shifted position as they watched. A magical representation of the actual night sky, Ben realized. Lyra placed her palm against the center of the doors, and they swung open silently to reveal the celestial chamber beyond. The room was circular, dominated by a domed ceiling that appeared to be open to the sky, though no wind disturbed the air inside. Stars shone with unusual brightness and clarity, and among them, patterns formed and dissolved in sequences that suggested meaning beyond random movement. The floor was a massive mosaic depicting a map of realms beyond the mortal world, with the dungeon represented as a spiraling vortex at its center. Standing in the middle of this cosmological artwork was a woman of such ethereal beauty that Ben's breath caught momentarily. She appeared to be in her mid-20s by human standards, but her eyes, completely black yet filled with pinpricks of light-like stars in the night sky, suggested an age beyond mortal comprehension. Her hair, flowing freely to her waist, shifted between midnight blue and the deep purple of distant nebulae. She wore robes of silver and white that seemed to both reflect and emit light. "Goddess Asteria," Lyra said, dropping to one knee in respect. "I've brought the source of the dimensional disturbance." Ben remained standing, unsure of the proper protocol but unwilling to kneel automatically to an unknown entity, goddess or not. In his experience, beings that demanded such obeisance rarely had mortals' best interests at heart. The goddess didn't seem offended by his stance. Instead, her star-filled eyes studied him with ancient intelligence, her head tilting slightly as though listening to music only she could hear. "Benjamin Kirby Tennyson," she said, her voice resonant with power yet surprisingly gentle. "Bearer of the Omnitrix, hero of many worlds." She stepped closer, her movement so graceful. She seemed to float across the mosaic floor. "You are very far from where you belong." Ben couldn't hide his surprise at her knowledge of his full name. "You know who I am." Asteria smiled, an expression of genuine warmth. "I am the goddess of stars, cosmic divination, and the spaces between worlds. Your arrival sent ripples through the astral sea that any with eyes to see would notice." Her Omnitrix. "But what you carry now is something even I have only heard whispered of in the darkness between constellations." She extended her hand, not touching the Omnitrix but holding her palm a few inches above it. The device responded, blue and green energies swirling more rapidly beneath its surface. "The forbidden core," she murmured, concern evident in her tone. "The key that unlocks the doors between dimensions. I had thought it merely a myth." "That makes two of us," Ben replied, feeling the Omnitrix warm against his skin as it reacted to the goddess's proximity. "Until it crashed into the desert and merged with the Omnitrix. Sending me here, wherever. Here, is exactly." "You were in Orario," Asteria answered, withdrawing her hand. "A city built atop the dungeon, a labyrinth that extends deep into the earth. Home to monsters and mysteries alike. The gods descended from the heavenly realm long ago to walk among mortals, granting blessings to those who serve in our familias." She gestured to Lyra, who still knelt nearby. "Rise, child. Our guest is no threat to us." Lyra stood, surprise evident in her expression. "Goddess, the dimensional disturbance caused by his arrival was substantial but stabilizing," Asteria completed. "The forbidden core sought an anchor point, a nexus between realities. It found one in the dungeon's heart." Her starry eyes returned to Ben. "What concerns me more is why it sought you specifically, Ben Tennyson, and what it means for both your world and ours." Ben's expression grew more serious. "In my experience, when ancient artifacts start dimension hopping and merging with powerful technology, it's rarely good news." He looked down at the modified Omnitrix. "My transformations have changed too, enhanced with some kind of energy native to this world." "That would be the Falna," Asteria explained. "Divine grace that empowers adventurers who descend into the dungeon." It seems the Forbidden Core has adapted your Omnitrix to draw upon this power, integrating you into our world's fundamental systems. This information clicked into place with the fragmented knowledge the dimensional transfer had planted in Ben's mind. So that's why Homungosaur was throwing around energy blasts along with the usual super strength. The Omnitrix is tapping into your world's magic system. A concerning development, Lyra interjected, her professional demeanor returning now that the initial introductions were complete. If his device can absorb fauna energy without a god's blessing, it could disrupt the entire balance of power in Orario. Asteria nodded thoughtfully. Indeed, the guild would certainly take interest in such an ability, as would the more ambitious of my divine siblings. She fixed Ben with her starry gaze. You must be cautious whom you trust with knowledge of your true nature, Ben Tennyson. Not all gods share my perspective on dimensional travelers. I'm guessing some might see me as a threat, others as a potential weapon. Ben said with the resigned tone of someone who'd been in similar situations before. Precisely, Asteria confirmed, particularly if word spreads about the Forbidden Core. There are those who have sought such power for millennia. Ben processed this information, mind already working on potential solutions. I need to find a way back to my dimension, or at least establish communication. My team will be looking for me. He glanced at the Omnitrix. And I need to understand exactly what the Forbidden Core has done to the Omnitrix before it causes more problems. Both worthy goals, Asteria agreed. And one's my familia is uniquely positioned to assist with. She turned to Lyra. Lady Andromeda will help you navigate our world while we study the dimensional disturbances. Perhaps we can find a way to return you home. Ben looked to Lyra, whose expression remained professionally neutral despite what amounted to a direct assignment from her goddess. I appreciate the help, but I don't want to impose on your time. Lyra's silver eyes met his green ones directly. My goddess has given me a task, and I will fulfill it to the best of my abilities. Besides, a hint of curiosity crept into her voice. Dimensional travelers with transformative abilities don't appear every day. Consider it a mutually beneficial arrangement. You gain a guide, and I gain unique research opportunities. Her practical approach was refreshing, and Ben found himself smiling. When you put it that way, how can I refuse? Asteria observed their exchange with ancient eyes that saw more than either mortal realized. It is settled then. Ben Tennyson, while you remain in our world, you will have the protection of the Asteria Familia, though not its blessing. Your Omnitrix seems to have provided that already, in its fashion. She gestured, and a small crystal floated from a nearby pedestal to hover before Ben. This communication stone is attuned to our familia. If you encounter trouble, activate it, and aid will come. Ben accepted the crystal, which glowed briefly at his touch before dimming to a subtle shimmer. Thank you. I'm not used to getting such a warm welcome when I crash land in strange places. The stars foretold your coming, Asteria said with a mysterious smile. Though even I did not anticipate the Forbidden Core's involvement. Her expression grew more serious. Rest tonight. Tomorrow, you and Lyra will visit the guild to establish your presence in Orario officially. Moving freely through the city will be difficult otherwise. Ben glanced at Lyra. I'm guessing, officially, means some kind of cover story. A partial truth, Lyra suggested. A foreign adventurer with a unique magic item, seeking to test his skills in the dungeon. Unusual, but not unheard of. The guild will require a demonstration of your abilities, Asteria added. Be mindful of which form you choose to reveal. First impressions matter greatly in Orario. Ben nodded, already concide. Ring which alien would be impressive without revealing too much about the Omnitrix's true capabilities. I'm familiar with the concept of secret identities. Good, Asteria said with finality. Lyra, we'll show you to guest quarters where you can rest. The dimensional transition taxes mortal bodies, even those as adaptable as yours. Now that she mentioned it, Ben did feel an underlying exhaustion beyond normal fatigue. The adrenaline of the night's events had kept it at bay, but it was rapidly catching up to him. Thank you for your hospitality, he said, genuine gratitude in his voice. And for not immediately assuming I'm a threat. Asteria's star-filled eyes seemed to see through him, to the core of who he was. I have observed your heart, Ben Tennyson. Despite the power you wield, it remains true. That is rarer than you might think, especially among those who walk between worlds. With a gesture of dismissal that somehow managed to feel respectful rather than peremptory, Goddess turned her attention to a series of astral charts hovering in the air, effectively ending the audience. Lyra led Ben from the celestial chamber, the doors closing silently behind them. As Hay walked back through the corridor of star charts, Ben found himself processing the whirlwind of information and impressions from his first hours in this new world. "Your goddess seems different from what I'd expect of a deity," he commented as they descended the spiral staircase to a lower level of the compound. Lyra considered this. Asteria is ancient even among the gods. She observes more than she interferes, studies more than she judges. It makes her unusual among the divine, many of whom came to the mortal realm seeking entertainment or conquest. "I've met my share of self-proclaimed gods," Ben said with a hint of darkness in his tone. "Most of them were tyrants with delusions of grandeur." Lyra glanced at him sharply. "Be careful speaking of the gods that weigh in Orario. Our power may be restricted in the mortal realm, but their influence remains vast." "Noted," Ben acknowledged. "Different world, different rules. To adapt." They reached a residential wing of the compound, where private rooms lined a hallway decorated with more subtle astronomical motifs. Lyra stopped before a door marked with a silver crescent moon. "These will be your quarters while you remain with us," she said, pushing the door open to reveal a comfortable if modest room. A bed with blue coverlets, a desk with writing materials, a wardrobe, and a window offering a view of Orario's eastern district. "The bathing chambers are at the end of the hall. I'll have appropriate clothing sent for you in the morning." Ben looked down at his earth clothes, jeans, t-shirt, and jacket, which stood out so obviously in this world. "Probably a good idea if I'm trying to blend in." "Rest well," Lyra said formally. "Morning comes early in Orario, and we have much to accomplish tomorrow." As she turned to leave, Ben called after her. "Lyra." She paused, looking back over her shoulder. "Thank you for the help with those monsters, and for not shooting me on sight when I transformed." Not everyone would have shown that restraint. A hint of a smile touched her lips. "I've been first class for 3 years, Ben Tennyson. It takes more than an unusual transformation to rattle me." Her silver EYs held his for a moment longer than necessary. "Besides, anyone who fights Shadowfangs with that level of competence deserves the benefit of the doubt." With that, she departed, leaving Ben alone in his temporary quarters. He sat heavily on the bed, the events of the day finally catching up to him. The Omnitrix pulsed gently on his wrist, its merged energies casting faint green and blue patterns across the darkened room. "What have you gotten us into this time?" he murmured to the device, receiving only a subtle warming sensation in response. Beyond the window, the unfamiliar stars of this world continued their ancient patterns, while below, the city of Orario pulsed with life and magic. Somewhere deep beneath it all, the dungeon waited, a nexus between dimensions that had somehow called to the forbidden Korin. By extension, to Ben himself. As exhaustion claimed him, Ben's last conscious thought was of home, of Gwen and Kevin, of Grandpa Max, of all those who would be searching for him across dimensions. Somehow, he would find his way back to them. But first, he needed to understand what the Forbidden Core wanted, and why it had chosen him. In the darkness of an unfamiliar room, in a world not his own, Ben Tennyson slept while the modified Omnitrix continued its silent integration with the magical energies of Orario, a process that would change both the device and its Elder in ways even Azimuth could not have foreseen. Chapter 1 End Chapter 2, A Hero in a Strange Land. Morning in Orario arrived with golden light spilling across ancient stone and modern marvels alike. Ben woke to unfamiliar sounds filtering through his window, merchants calling their wares, the distant clanging of a blacksmith's hammer, the melodic chiming of what might have been magical devices activating with the dawn. For a disorienting moment, he couldn't place where he was, but the weight of the modified Omnitrix on his wrist provided immediate clarity. "Right," he muttered, sitting up and running a hand through his tousled brown hair. "Alternate dimension. Magic dungeon. Gods walking around like it's perfectly normal." The Omnitrix pulsed as if in response, its swirling patterns of green and blue energy seeming more integrated than they had been the previous night. Ben studied it closely, noting subtle changes to the interface, new symbols interspersed with his familiar alien roster, and what appeared to be status indicators in a script he somehow understood despite never having seen it before. A knock at the door interrupted his examination. "Ben Tennyson," came Lyra's crisp voice. "Are you awake? We have much to accomplish today." "I'm up," he called back, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. "Give me a few minutes to get ready. There are clothes in the wardrobe that should fit you. Meet me in the courtyard when you're dressed." Her footsteps retreated down the hallway without waiting for a response. Ben found the promised clothing, a tunic of sturdy dark green fabric, leather trousers, boots, and a short jacket that appeared to be designed for ease of movement rather than fashion. The materials felt strange against his skin, slightly rougher than earth fabrics but surprisingly comfortable and flexible. The mirror in the corner revealed a young man who looked like Ben Tennyson dressed for a Renaissance fair. He smiled wryly at his reflection. "Not the weirdest outfit I've ever worn. Not by a long shot." After using the washing facilities at the end of the hall, which featured running water through mechanisms that seemed partly magical, mechanical, Ben made his way through the Asteria Familia compound. By daylight, the structure revealed even more impressive details: astronomical instruments of delicate craftsmanship, murals depicting celestial events, and Familia members engaged in various scholarly and martial pursuits. Several gave him curious glances as he passed, though whether because they sensed his otherworldly nature or simply recognized him as a stranger, he couldn't tell. The courtyard Lyra had mentioned proved to be a circular space open to the sky, ringed by elegant columns inscribed with more astronomical symbols. At its center stood a fountain where water flowed in defiance of gravity, forming complex patterns that resembled constellations before cascading into a basin of midnight blue stone. Lyra waited beside the fountain, her posture military straight, silver eyes alert. By daylight, Ben could see more details of her appearance, the iridescent quality of her armor that seemed to shift colors depending on the angle of light, the intricate braid that kept her midnight blue hair practical while incorporating silver threads that matched her eyes, the numerous small scars on her exposed forearms that spoke of years of combat experience. "You clean up well," she observed as he approached, her tone professionally neutral though her eyes conducted a thorough assessment. "The colors suit you." "Thanks," Ben replied with his characteristic easy confidence. "So what's first on the agenda? You mentioned the guild yesterday." "Breakfast," Lyra said decisively, "then the guild. You'll need your strength for what's to come." She led him through a different exit from the courtyard, explaining as they walked, "The Asteria Familia takes most meals in the observatory dining hall, but I thought best to introduce you to Orario's culture more, gradually. There's an establishment nearby that serves excellent food and attracts a diverse clientele. It will give you a chance to observe how different familias interact." "Sounds good to me," Ben said, falling into step beside her. "The more I understand about how this world works, the better." As they left the compound, two guards at the entrance nodded respectfully to Lyra. Ben noted that while they remained alert, their demeanor toward him had shifted from open suspicion to cautious neutrality, presumably on Asteria's orders. The morning streets of Orario's eastern district bustled with activity. Scholars in robes hurried between buildings carrying scrolls and artifacts, merchants displayed wares with magical properties Ben could only guess at, and adventurers in distinctive armor moved with purpose toward the enormous tower that dominated the city skyline. "That's Babel Tower," Lyra explained, following his gaze. "Built of the dungeon entrance to contain the monsters within. The guild headquarters occupies its lower levels, and people actually go down there voluntarily. Into a labyrinth full of monsters?" Ben asked, though he already knew the answer from the fragments of knowledge the dimensional transfer had given him. "For the magic stones and drop items," Lyra confirmed. "Monster crystals power everything from lighting to transportation in Orario. Adventurers harvest them, the guild processes tea continues." She glanced at him. "I imagine your world has its own resource economies." "Fossil fuels, mostly," Ben replied. "Though we're moving toward renewables. No monster hunting required." "Fortunate," Lyra commented dryly. "Though I suspect your world has its own dangers." Ben thought of the countless alien invasions, time travelers, and interdimensional conquerors he'd faced over the years. "You could say that," They turned down a wider avenue where the buildings grew slightly less academic in nature, with more shops and establishments catering to adventurers and civilians alike. Lyra stopped before a two-story building with large windows and a sign depicting a steaming cup over a crescent moon. The Crescent Brew, she announced, one of the better establishments in this district, and neutral territory for most familias. Inside, the space was warm and inviting, polished wooden tables arranged around a central hearth, walls lined with bookshelves, and a long counter where various beverages were being prepared. The clientele was indeed diverse. Scholarly types with ink-stained fingers, adventurers with weapons propped beside their chairs, merchants discussing business over steaming cups, and even what appeared to be a non-human server, a young woman with fox-like ears and tail. Ho moved with graceful efficiency between tables. A Renard, Lyra explained quietly, noting Ben's interest. One of several demi-human races in our world. They found a table near a window, and the fox-eared server approached with a genuine smile. Lady Andromeda, it's been too long since you've graced us with your presence. Hello, Mira, Lyra replied with a warmth Ben hadn't yet heard in her voice. My duties have kept me occupied. This is Ben, a visitor to Orario who's under our familia's protection. Myra's amber eyes studied Ben with open curiosity, her fox ears twitching slightly. Welcome to Orario. First time in the city. That obvious, huh? Ben replied with a friendly smile. You have that wide-eyed look, Mira said cheerfully. Don't worry, everyone does their first time seeing the city of adventurers. What can I bring you both? Lyra ordered for them. Something called honeyed oat porridge with spiced fruits for Ben, and a darker, heartier grain dish for herself, Al. Ong with tea that smelled of unfamiliar herbs when it arrived moments later. As they ate, the food proving delicious despite its unfamiliarity, Lyra outlined their plan for the day. The guild will require you to register if you intend to enter the dungeon. Since we can't explain your true origins, we'll present you as a foreign adventurer with a unique magic item. The Omnitrix, Ben nodded, taking a sip of the tea and finding it surprisingly pleasant, something like mint but with deeper, earthier notes. Precisely. They'll want to assess your capabilities, which means a practical demonstration. Lyra's silver eyes met his directly. Choose your transformation carefully, something impressive enough to establish your credentials, but not so overwhelming that it attracts unwanted attention. Ben considered his options, mentally cycling through his alien roster. I've got just the form in mind. Impressive but not world-shattering. Good. After registration, we should acquire proper equipment for you. I don't actually need weapons, Ben interrupted. The Omnitrix has me covered for combat situations. Lyra's expression remained patient but firm. In Orario, an adventurer with visible weapons draws more attention than one fully armed. Besides, your device might malfunction or require rest. It's best to have alternatives. Ben wanted to explain that the Omnitrix didn't work that way, it didn't get tired. Though it did have recharge periods between transformations, but he recognized the wisdom in blending in. Fair point. I could use a backup plan. Exactly. Lyra nodded approvingly. After equipping you, we'll make a brief expedition into the upper floors of the dungeon. Nothing too challenging, but enough to help you understand what adventurers face daily. And to see how the Omnitrix functions in the dungeon environment, Ben added, understanding her unstated objective. The hint of a smile touched Lyra's lips. You catch on quickly. Their breakfast was interrupted by a commotion at the entrance. A group of adventurers entering with boisterous energy, their armor bearing an emblem of crossed spears over a shield. Their leader, a tall man with a scarred face and an elaborate mustache, spotted Lyra and made a beeline for their table, his companions following closely. Well, if it isn't Orario's star archer herself, he announced loudly, slumming with the regular familias today. Lady Andromeda. Lyra's expression cooled instantly, though her voice remained civil. Captain Doros, I wasn't aware the martial familia frequented the Eastern District. We go where the action is. Doros replied, placing his hands on their table and leaning forward, deliberately invading their space. His eyes flicked to Ben with dismissive curiosity. Found yourself a rookie to train. Doesn't look like much. Ben met the man's gaze calmly, years of dealing with bullies and alien warlords making this particular brand of intimidation almost quaint. Appearances can be deceiving. Doros snorted. Got a mouth on him, at least. His attention returned to Lyra. Word is your familia's been in an uproar since last night. Some kind of magical disturbance. Care to share what Asteria's star pupils are investigating these days? Guild business, Lyra replied coolly. If your goddess is interested in collaboration, she knows the proper channels. The captain's expression hardened slightly. Always so proper, aren't you? Some of us remember when you were just another rookie with more ambition than sense. He straightened, adjusting his gauntlets unnecessarily. Come find me when you want a real challenge in the dungeon, not babysitting duty. With that, he and his companions moved to a larger table across the room, their loud conversation filling the previously peaceful space. Friend of yours? Ben asked dryly after they'd gone. Former training partner, Lyra replied, her tone making it clear the subject was closed. Finish your meal. The guild awaits. The journey to Babel Tower took them through the heart of Orario, providing Ben with a panoramic view of the city's diverse districts, from the refined eastern district to the more commercial central area, where shops catering to adventurers lined broad avenues, and finally to the imposing tower itself. Up close, Babel was even more impressive than it had appeared from a distance. The white structure soared impossibly high, its architecture unlike anything Ben had seen on Earth, a blend of ancient and futuristic elements that somehow worked in harmonious concert. Multiple entrances ringed its base, each leading to different sections of the vast complex. The guild occupies the northwest quadrant, Lyra explained, leading him toward one such entrance. The remaining space houses shops, facilities for adventurers, and administrative offices for various familias. Inside, the space opened into a vast atrium bustling with activity. Adventurers lined up at counters staffed by officials in identical uniforms, while others gathered around bulletin boards displaying what appeared to be job postings. The ceiling soared several stories above, with balconies at each level where more offices and meeting rooms were visible. Impressive, Ben commented, taking in the scale of the operation. Reminds me of Plumber's headquarters, just with less alien tech. Lyra G. Avenue him a curious look but didn't ask for clarification. Instead, she guided him toward a less crowded counter where a young woman with shoulder-length brown hair and intelligent eyes was reviewing documents. Advisor Tool, Lyra greeted formally. The woman looked up, recognition and respect immediately evident in her expression. Lady Andromeda, this is an unexpected honor. How may the guild assist the Asteria Familia today? A foreign adventurer seeking registration, Lyra explained smoothly. He possesses a unique magic item and wishes to test his skills in the dungeon. The Asteria F.A. Milia is sponsoring his introduction to Orario. Advisor Tool, whose nameplate identified her as Aina, regarded Ben with professional assessment. I see. We don't often receive foreign adventurers without prior familia attachments. She pulled out a series of forms from beneath her counter. The registration process is quite thorough, Mr. Tennyson. May I ask which region you hail from? Ben had prepared for this question during breakfast. A small kingdom far to the west, beyond the Great Desert. It's called Bellwood. Using his hometown's name seemed safer than inventing something he might forget. Aina made a note, though her slight frown suggested the location wasn't familiar to her. And this magic item Lady Andromeda mentioned. Ben held up his wrist, showing the Omnitrix. It allows me to transform temporarily, enhancing my combat abilities. A transformation item. Aina's interest visibly increased. Those are quite rare. The guild will require a demonstration before classification and registration can be completed. She stood, gathering the forms. If you'll follow me to the assessment chamber, we can proceed immediately. She led them through a door behind the counters and down a corridor to a large, open room with reinforced walls and a high ceiling. Various training dummies and targets were arranged throughout the space, and observation windows lined one wall where other guild officials could watch proceedings safely. This is where we evaluate unique abilities, Aina explained, positioning herself near the observation area. Please demonstrate your items, capabilities so we can properly classify your potential. Ben glanced at Lyra, who gave him a subtle nod. He stepped into the center of the room, considering which transformation would make the right impression. Powerful enough to establish credibility but not so overwhelming as to cause alarm. Here goes, he said, activating the Omnitrix with practiced ease. The holographic interface appeared, showing his alien roster intermingled with the new symbols he'd noticed that morning. He selected a familiar form and pressed down on the dial. Green light flashed, temporarily blinding the observers. When it faded, where Ben had stood now crouched a sleek, velociraptor-like being with blue and black skin, a helmet-like crest, wheels in place of feet, and razor-sharp claws. XLR-8, the alien announced in a raspy, accelerated voice. One of my faster transformations. Aina gasped, taking an involuntary step back, while murmurs erupted from the observation area. Even Lyra, who had witnessed Humungosaur the previous night, looked impressed by this completely different form. Without waiting for further instruction, XLR-8 demonstrated his abilities, moving in a blur around the chamber, weaving between training dummies with precision that made him appear to be in multiple places simultaneously. The blue track-like energy that typically accompanied his movements now had an additional component, glowing symbols that briefly appeared in the air where he passed, similar to the status symbols Ben had noticed on the Omnitrix earlier. For a finale, XLR-8 generated a miniature cyclone in the center of the room, lifting several training dummies into the air before gently setting them down in a perfect circle. He then returned to his starting position and transformed back to human form in another flash of green light. That's just one of the transformations I can access, Ben explained to the stunned guild representatives. Each has different abilities suited to various situations. Na seemed to recover her professional composure with effort. That was most impressive, Mr. Tennyson. I've never seen a magic item with such comprehensive transformation capabilities. She made several rapid notes on her forms. How many such forms can you access? Ben considered how much to reveal. Several, he answered vaguely. The device requires time to recharge between transformations, and I can only maintain each form for limited periods. These weren't exactly lies. The Omnitrix did have a recharge period, though it had grown shorter over the years as the device evolved. I see. Aina continued writing, then looked up with a professional smile. Based on this demonstration, I believe we can classify you as at least level 2 equivalent, pending field assessment. The transformation speed alone would qualify you, even without the impressive strength and cyclone generation. She led them back to her counter where she completed the paperwork with efficient precision. You'll need to update your status regularly at your familia's headquarters, she paused, looking confused. Though you mentioned you don't have a familia yet. He's under Asteria's protection while in Orario, Lyra interjected smoothly. His status is complicated. Aina frowned slightly. Without a fauna, entering the dungeon is extremely dangerous, regardless of magical items. I'll take responsibility for his safety, Lyra stated with quiet authority. The Asteria Familia has authorized a joint expedition to assess his capabilities in actual dungeon conditions. This seemed to satisfy Aina, who stamped several forms and handed them to Ben along with a small identification card. Your provisional adventurer's pass. This grants you access to the upper 10 floors of the dungeon and basic guild services. Further clearance will require additional assessment and proper familia registration. She hesitated, then added in a more personal tone, please be careful, Mr. Tennyson. Even the upper floors can be deadly to the unprepared. Lady Andromeda is one of our most respected first-class adventurers, but even she cannot guarantee safety in the dungeon. I appreciate the concern, Ben replied with genuine gratitude. But I've faced dangerous situations before. Of course, Aina nodded, returning to her professional demeanor. Is there anything else the guild can assist with today? That will be all, Advisor Tool. Lyra said. Thank you for your efficiency. As they left the guild headquarters, Ben noticed significantly more attention directed their way, whispers following in their wake. Curious and sometimes suspicious glances from other adventurers. His demonstration had not gone unnoticed. Word travels fast, he commented as they emerged back into the sunlight. Faster than even your transformation, Lyra confirmed, scanning the crowd with practiced vigilance. By nightfall, every familia in Orario will know about the foreigner with the unusual transformation magic. Will that be a problem? It makes you interesting, Lyra said, her tone making clear that interesting wasn't necessarily positive. Some will want to recruit you, others to challenge you, and a few to study your device. Her silver eyes met his. We should move quickly to the next phase of our plan. The Hephaestus Familia district buzzed with the sounds of creation, hammers striking anvils. The hiss of hot metal meeting water, the grinding of whetstones on blades. Here, the finest smiths and crafters in Orario plied their trade, creating weapons and armor for adventurers wealthy enough to afford their services. Most of these shops are beyond your current means, Lyra explained as they walked past elaborate storefronts displaying masterwork weapons behind enchanted glass. But I know a place that offers quality without the premium prices. She led him down a side street to a modest workshop with a simple sign depicting an interlocking deer and water droplet. Unlike the glamorous main thoroughfare, this area housed smaller operations, talented crafters who hadn't yet achieved the recognition or patronage of the elite. Riverwalk Artifice, Lyra announced, pushing open the door. A small bell chimed, but the sound was nearly lost beneath the bubbling of liquids, the clinking of tools, and a soft, melodious humming. The interior was organized shared in half-completed projects. Shelves laden with materials ranging from ordinary metals to crystalline substances that glowed with inner light, and walls hung with diagrams featuring complex magical formulas. The air smelled of hot metal, strange chemicals, and something reminiscent of ocean spray. "Just a moment," called a musical voice from behind a curtained doorway. "Don't touch anything that's glowing, smoking, or making noise." Ben and Lyra exchanged glances, both instinctively taking a step back from a nearby table where several objects were doing all three. The curtain parted to reveal a young woman who paused upon seeing her visitors, blue-green eyes widening in surprise. "Lady Andromeda, I wasn't expecting. That is, I didn't think." She wiped her hands hastily on an already stained apron and attempted to tuck a wayward strand of aquamarine hair behind her ear, leaving a smudge of something iridescent on her pale cheek. "Hello, NAIA," Lyra greeted with unexpected warmth. "It's been too long." NAIA Riverwalk appeared to be in her early 20s, with a slender build and delicate features that suggested mixed heritage. Her aquamarine hair, clearly natural rather than dyed, cascaded in waves to her mid-back, though much of it was contained in a practical but messy bun. Her skin had a subtle pearlescent quality, especially noticeable around her temples and the backs of her hands, where faint patterns resembling scales caught the light when she moved. Her workshop attire consisted of sturdy trousers and a loose shirt under a heavy leather apron covered in pockets, each containing various tools and materials. Around her neck hung multiple lenses on chains, and fingerless gloves protected her hands while leaving her dexterous fingers free for detailed work. "It has been ages," NAIA agreed, fidgeting slightly before seeming to remember her professional role. "What can I craft for you today? I've improved the quiver design you commissioned last year, added a temporal Tassus field to maintain arrow integrity even in extreme conditions. I've been meaning to send word." "Actually," Lyra interrupted gently, "we're here for my companion. Ben, this is NAIA Riverwalk, THE finest young artifice crafter in Orario. NAIA, this is Ben Tennyson, a visitor to our city with unique requirements." Ben stepped forward with a friendly smile, extending his hand. "Nice to meet you." NAIA stared at his offered hand for a moment before awkwardly returning the gesture, her grip surprisingly firm despite her delicate appearance. "Oh, you're the transformation mage everyone's talking about. News travels fast through the crafting district. Supposedly you turned into some kind of blue speedster creature at the guild this morning. Is that accurate? What's the underlying magical principle? Is it elemental affinity or conceptual manifestation? Does it require a chant or—" NAIA, Lyra interrupted again, this time with fond exasperation. "Ben needs equipment suitable for dungeon exploration. Basic necessities to start." "Oh, right, of course." Naya's enthusiasm damped slightly as she released Ben's hand. "Practical matters first, questions later." She gave Ben an apologetic smile. "Sorry, I get carried away with new magical concepts." "No problem," Ben replied, finding her enthusiasm refreshing after Lyra's constant reserve. "And it's not exactly magic, it's more like technology combined with genetic reconfiguration." Naya's eyes lit up like stars. "Techno-magical genetic modification. That's even more fascinating." I've been experimenting with combining ional crafting techniques with organic components, but the rejection rate is prohibitively high unless you incorporate a stabilizing matrix of NAIA, Lyra said for the third time, though there was unmistakable affection in her tone. Equipment first. Right. NAIA visibly reined in her excitement, assuming a more professional demeanor. Let me show you what I have available. She led them deeper into the workshop, past bubbling alchemical setups and half-assembled devices whose purposes Ben could only guess at. In a clearer area toward the back, weapon racks and armor stands displayed her completed works, simpler than the masterpieces in the main thoroughfare, but with an elegant functionality that appealed to Ben's practical nature. Since you're a transformation specialist, you'll need adaptable equipment, NAIA mused, studying Ben with an appraising eye. Nothing too restrictive or heavy that might interfere with the process or be damaged during transformation. That's exactly right, Ben said, impressed by her immediate understanding of his needs. Ideally something I can wear that won't get in the way when I change forms. NAIA nodded, moving to a workbench covered in sketches. I've been developing a line of adaptive gear for adventurers with shapeshifting abilities. Nothing as comprehensive as what you demonstrated, but the principles should be similar. She rifled through the drawings before pulling out several. These use enchanted materials that respond to the wearer's magical signature, expanding or contracting within certain parameters. The D.E. signs showed clever mechanisms and materials that could stretch or compress without breaking, something like the unstable molecules Reed Richards had developed for the Fantastic Four's uniforms in comic books Ben had read as a kid. That sounds perfect, Ben said, genuinely impressed. You created these yourself. Naya's pale cheeks flushed slightly at the direct praise. It's still experimental. Most crafters focus on traditional equipment because shapeshifters are relatively rare, but I've always been interested in adaptive technologies. My mother's people use similar principles in their deep ocean habitats. Your mother's people? Ben asked, curious about her unique appearance. I'm half Undine, NAIA explained, gesturing vaguely to her aquamarine hair and the pearlescent quality of her skin. Water spirits who can adapt to different depths and pressures. My father is human, a Hephaestus familia crafter. I inherited some adaptability from her, technical skills from him. She turned away quickly, as though uncomfortable discussing her heritage, and busied herself gathering equipment from various shelves and containers. For a beginner's set, I recommend lightweight armor with reinforced joints. A multi-purpose tool for accessing locked areas or making repairs, a basic weapon for situations where transformation might be impractical, and a secure pack for carrying loot and supplies. She laid out each item as she described it, a vest of supple leather with subtle enchantments woven into the seams, a multi-tool that resembled a Swiss Army knife but with magical components. A short sword with a simple but elegant design, and a backpack with numerous compartments and expandable sections. The vest has minor protective enchantments, NAIA explained, warming to her subject. Nothing that will stop a Minotaur's axe, but it'll turn aside glancing blows and resist most environmental hazards in the upper floors. The sword is basic but well balanced. I can customize it later if you discover a preference for certain fighting styles. Ben examined the equipment with genuine appreciation. Despite being basic, each piece showed exceptional craftsmanship and thoughtful design. These are amazing, NAIA. Exactly what I need. Her smile at the compliment transformed her entire demeanor, confidence replacing awkwardness. I can make adjustments once you've had a chance to test them in the field. And I'd love to study your transformation device if you're willing. The applications for adaptive equipment could be revolutionary. Ben hesitated, glancing at Lyra, who gave a subtle nod. Maybe after we've established ourselves a bit more in Orario. The Omnitrix is complicated. Of course, NAIA agreed, though her eyes lingered on the device with undisguised fascination. No rush. Science advances through careful observation and controlled experimentation, not hasty prodding. As Ben tried on surprisingly comfortable, Lyra and NAIA discussed payment arrangements. He caught fragments about familia accounts and ongoing collaboration, suggesting that Lyra was establishing a longer-term relationship between Ben and the craftswoman. All set, Lyra announced after concluding the business discussion. NAIA will be our primary equipment supplier while you're in Orario. She's trustworthy and discreet, and endlessly curious, NAIA added with a self-deprecating smile. But I can respect boundaries. Mostly. Ben found himself returning her smile. There was something genuinely likable about the half-undine craftswoman, her enthusiasm for her work, her obvious intelligence. And the way she seemed to vibrate with barely contained creative energy. I look forward to working with you, he said sincerely. And maybe eventually satisfying some of that curiosity about the Omnitrix. The Omnitrix, NAIA repeated, testing the unfamiliar word. Is that what your device is called? Fascinating name. Implies a connection to time or measurement. Something like that, Ben acknowledged. Impressed by her quick linguistic analysis. It's complicated. The best things usually are, she replied with unexpected insight. Then, seeming to remember herself, she gathered up the equipment they'd selected. Let me package these properly for you. If you're heading into the dungeon today, you'll want everything secure and accessible. As she busied herself with this task, Lyra spoke quietly to Ben. NAIA is unusual even by Orario standards, brilliant but socially isolated because of her mixed heritage. Her understanding of magical technology is unparalleled among crafters her age, but the Hephaestus Familia overlooks her because she doesn't fit their traditional mold. Their loss, Ben commented, watching as NAIA efficiently organized the equipment. Her movements precise and practiced despite her earlier nervous energy. She seems incredible at what she does. She is, Lyra agreed. And she may be uniquely qualified to help us understand how the Omnitrix is adapting to this world. The Asteria Familia studies cosmic phenomena, but NAIA understands the practical applications of magical technology in ways even our scholars don't. NAIA returned with everything neatly packaged, the sword belted and ready to wear, the vest adjusted to Ben's measurements, and the pack organized for optimal weight distribution. All set. I've included a basic adventurer's handbook I wrote. It covers common monsters in the upper floors, resource gathering techniques, and emergency protocols. Most official guides are written by people who haven't actually crafted equipment. So they miss practical details. Thanks, NAIA, Ben said, genuinely appreciative as he secured the sword belt. The weight felt strange. He rarely used weapons, relying on his transformations instead, but he had to admit it completed his adventurer appearance convincingly. This is above and beyond. That's just how she operates, Lyra commented with that same unexpected warmth she seemed to reserve for the craftswoman. NAIA doesn't know how to do things halfway. NAIA ducked her head slightly at the praise. Will you, that is, would you be willing to share data about how the equipment performs? For research purposes, sure thing, Ben agreed easily. Maybe we can stop by after our dungeon run today. The craftswoman's face lit up. That would be perfect. I'll prepare my observation equipment and clear space for a proper analysis session. As they prepared to leave, NAIA impulsively caught Ben's wrist, the one without the Omnitrix, her expression suddenly serious. Be careful down there. The dungeon, it's not just a place. It's alive in its own way, and it doesn't like intruders. Even the upper floors can be deadly if you don't respect them. I will, Ben promised, struck by her genuine concern for someone she'd just met. And I've got a pretty good guide. He nodded toward Lyra, who waited by the door. NAIA released his wrist, looking slightly embarrassed by her own intensity. Of course, Lady Andromeda is one of the best. It's just, the dungeon feels different lately. More active, like it's anticipating something. This caught both Ben's and Lyra's attention. How do you mean? Lyra asked, returning to them with sudden interest. NAIA gestured vaguely, struggling to articulate her impression. It's in the magic stones I've been receiving from suppliers. Their resonance patterns have shifted, becoming more synchronized. It's subtle, but as someone who works with their energy daily, I can feel the difference. She looked at Ben with those sea-green eyes. It started around the time you arrived. The implications hung in the air between them. If the dungeon itself was reacting to Ben's presence, or more specifically, to the Forbidden Core merged with the Omnitrix, that suggested connections more profound than they'd initially realized. All the more reason for our expedition today, Lyra said decisively. We need to observe these effects firsthand. They bid farewell to NAIA, who extracted promises of a detailed report on their return, and stepped back into the bustling crafting district. Ben, now properly outfitted as an Orario adventurer, drew far less attention than before, just another visitor preparing for the dungeon, albeit one with unusual coloring and foreign features. "I like her," Ben commented, as they made their way toward Babel Tower. "She's smart and genuinely passionate about her work." "Naia is one of a kind," Lyra agreed. "Her insights about the dungeon's changing energy patterns concern me, however. If the Forbidden Core is affecting the dungeon's behavior, we may face unexpected challenges even on the upper floors." Ben adjusted the sword at his hip, still getting used to its weight. "Nothing I can't handle. Between the Omnitrix and your experience, we should be fine." Lyra gave him a sidelong glance. "That confidence, is it earned through experience, or natural optimism?" "Both," Ben replied without hesitation. "I've been doing this hero thing since I was 10 years old." "You learn to trust your abilities while respecting the dangers." 10. Lyra looked genuinely surprised. "You've been an adventurer since childhood." Ben realized he'd revealed more than intended. "Something like that. Let's just say I grew up fast." Lyra seemed to accept this non-explanation, recognizing the boundaries he was establishing. "Well, your confidence will be tested soon enough. We've arrived." Before them loomed the enormous entrance to Babel Tower, and beyond it, the gateway to the dungeon itself. Adventurers of all descriptions moved in and out, some fresh-faced and eager, others battle-worn and grim, many in groups discussing strategies or comparing loot. The atmosphere buzzed with energy, danger, and opportunity. "First rule of the dungeon," Lyra said as they approached the massive doors. "Never let your guard down. Not even on the first floor." Ben nodded, feeling the Omnitrix pulse warmly on his wrist, as if eager for the challenges ahead. "Let's do this." The transition from Babel Tower to the dungeon was both abrupt and disorienting. One moment they were in a bustling, civilized structure. The next, they descended a broad staircase into what appeared to be a natural cave system, albeit one with unnaturally smooth walls and an eerie, ambient light that seemed to emanate from the stone itself. "The upper floors are the most stable and predictable," Lyra explained as they reached the bottom of the stairs. "Floor 1 consists mainly of wide tunnels and chambers with minimal elevation changes. Monsters are relatively weak, goblins and kobolds primarily, but can still be deadly in large numbers or to the unprepared." Ben took in their surroundings with trained eyes, noting the tunnel configurations, potential choke points, and escape routes, habits formed through years of combat situations. "The air feels different down here. Heavier somehow." "The dungeon has its own atmosphere," Lyra confirmed. "Some theorize of whatever entity created this place. The deeper you go, the more distinct it becomes." They moved cautiously through the tunnels, Lyra pointing out features of interest, wall patterns that indicated potential monster spawn points, crystalline formations that signaled the recent presence of magical beasts, and subtle markings left by other adventurers as navigational aids. "Most novices hunt in parties," she noted as they passed several groups of young adventurers clustered around monster corpses, harvesting crystals. "Solo exploration is considered either foolhardy or a mark of exceptional skill." "Which category do we fall into?" Ben asked with a hint of humor. "With your transformations and my experience." "Exceptional, obviously." There was no boasting in Lyra's tone, just a matter-of-fact assessment of their capabilities. They continued deeper into the first floor, occasionally encountering small groups of goblins, ugly, green-skinned humanoids barely reaching waist height but armed with crude weapons and surprising cunning. Lyra dispatched several with her bow, demonstrating pinpoint accuracy that impressed even Ben, who had fought alongside master marksmen before. "Your turn," she said after they encountered a larger group blocking a tunnel intersection. "Show me how you handle multiple opponents in confined spaces." Ben assessed the situation. 6 goblins armed with clubs and knives, positioned in a formation that suggested basic tactical awareness. The narrow tunnel limited his transformation options. Anything too large would risk damaging the structure. "Time for a field test," he decided, activating the Omnitrix. After cycling through options, he selected one of his more versatile aliens and pressed down on the dial. Green light flashed, and Diamond Head stood in Ben's place, a crystalline humanoid with a body composed of reflective, emerald material that could reshape itself into weapons and shields. Like Homungosaur before, this form now featured additional patterns of blue energy flowing through the crystal structure, enhancing the natural luminescence of his body. The goblins hesitated, clearly unnerved by the transformation. Diamond Head used their moment of confusion to attack, forming his right arm into a broad shield while extending crystal shards from his left to create a multi-pronged weapon. "Let's see how they like this," he rumbled, his voice resonating through his crystalline form. He charged forward, shield-leading, and bowled into the goblin formation with controlled force. Two were immediately knocked unconscious by the impact, while a third found itself impaled on crystal protrusions, not deeply enough to kill, but sufficient to immobilize it. The remaining three recovered quickly, circling to attack from multiple angles. One leapt at Diamond Head's back, only to find its weapon shattering harmlessly against the crystalline surface. "Diam!" Head responded by generating a crystal growth from his back that caught the goblin mid-leap and pinned it to the wall. "Two left," he called to Lyra, who was observing with professional interest. The final goblins proved more cunning, one attempting to distract him while the other aimed for what it perceived as a weak point, the Omnitrix symbol on his chest. Diamond Head anticipated the move, generating a crystal cage around the attacking goblin just as it lunged. The last opponent, seeing its companions defeated, attempted to flee. Diamond Head extended his arm, transforming it into a Krys-Taline whip that wrapped around the creature's legs, tripping it. In seconds, all 6 goblins were subdued or unconscious. "Efficient," Lyra commented, approaching to examine the restrained monsters. "And notably non-lethal. Most adventurers would have simply eliminated the threat." Diamond Head reverted to human form in a flash of green light, Ben shrugging as the transformation completed. "Force of habit. I try not to kill if I can avoid it, even when dealing with hostile species." "An unusual philosophy in Orario," Lyra noted, retrieving a knife from her belt. "Unfortunately, these creatures will simply regenerate within the dungeon if not properly dispatched. The magic stones must be removed," she demonstrated, quickly and humanely ending one goblin's life before extracting a small crystalline stone from its chest cavity. The creature's body immediately began to dissolve into ash-like particles. "The stone is the monster's core," she explained, holding up the glowing crystal. "It powers their existence. Removing it releases the dungeon's energy back into the system." Ben watched with mixed feelings as Lyra efficiently processed the remaining goblins, collecting their magic stones in a pouch at her belt. While he understood the necessity, these weren't sentient beings in the way he usually defined it, but manifestations of the dungeon's energy. It still felt strange to participate in what amounted to systematic monster harvesting. "The guild processes these?" he asked as they continued deeper, now carrying several magic stones. "They're the foundation of Orario's economy," Lyra confirmed. "Everything from lighting to heating to complex magical devices runs on refined magic stone energy. Different monsters produce different types and qualities of stones, with deeper floor monsters yielding more powerful specimens." They proceeded through the first floor and down to the second, where the tunnels grew slightly wider and the ambient light took on a bluer tinge. Here they encountered not just goblins but kobolds as well, dog-like humanoids with greater strength and speed than their goblin counterparts. Ben cycled through several transformations during our exploration. Swampfire to handle a particularly large group of monsters, Forearms to clear a collapsed passage, and Wild Mud to track the source of a strange scent that led them to a rare herb growing in a hidden chamber. Each transformation displayed the same enhancement pattern, traditional abilities augmented by the blue energy of this world's magical system. Throughout their expedition, Lyra observed and occasionally offered tactical suggestions, but largely allowed Ben to handle combat situations his own way. He appreciated her approach, neither micromanaging nor completely hands-off, the practical collaboration of experienced fighters who respected each other's methods. "You're adapting quickly to dungeon conditions," she commented after Ben, as Heatblast eliminated a swarm of bat-like creatures that had ambushed them in a high-ceiling chamber. Most newcomers struggle with the unpredictable nature of monster spawns and environmental hazards. "I'm used to adapting on the fly," Ben replied after returning to human form. "Though I have to admit, Having the monsters literally materialize from the walls takes some getting used to. They had reached the third floor, W. Here the dungeon's structure began to show more variation. Chambers of different sizes connected by winding passages, occasional water features, and more diverse monster types. A larger group of adventurers passed them heading upward. Looking battered but satisfied, their packs heavy with collected items. We should consider turning back soon, Lyra suggested, checking the position of light Krista. LS that somehow served as chronometers in this sunless environment. For a first expedition, 3 floors is more than adequate, and we've gathered sufficient data on how your transformations function in the dungeon environment. Ben nodded agreement, though part of him was curious to see deeper levels. Lead the way. I promised NAIA we'd stop by afterward. As they began retracing their steps, the Omnitrix suddenly pulsed with unusual intensity, the swirling patterns of green and blue energy becoming more active. Ben stopped, holding up his wrist with a frown. Something's happening, he said. Just as the ground beneath them trembled slightly, Lyra instantly went on alert, bow in hand and arrow nocked with impressive speed. That's not normal for the upper floors. Tremors usually indicate large monster Mr. levels. The trembling intensified, and cracks appeared in the floor of the tunnel junction where they stood. The Omnitrix's pulsing increased in tempo, almost like a warning. I think we should move, Ben suggested, backing away from the spreading cracks. Now, they had barely retreated 10 paces when the floor collapsed entirely, revealing a previously unknown chamber beneath. From the darkness below emerged a creature unlike the relatively simple monsters they'd encountered thus far, a massive, serpentine form with armored scales and multiple limbs ending in wicked claws. Its head featured a crown-like crest of bone, and its eyes glowed with malevolent intelligence. An amphisbaena, Lyra identified, her voice tight with controlled alarm. It shouldn't be here. They're 15th floor monsters at minimum. The creature reared up, easily reaching the ceiling of the tunnel despite emerging from a lower level. Its mouth opened to reveal rows of serrated teeth, and it emitted a shrieking roar that echoed painfully through the confined space. I'm guessing that's bad, Ben said, already activating the Omnitrix. Very, Lyra confirmed, loosing an arrow that struck the creature's armored hide and barely penetrated. Its scales resist most conventional weapons, and its venom causes rapid paralysis. Then we'll go unconventional, Ben decided, selecting a form and transforming in a flash of green light. Where he had stood now towered a massive creature composed of what appeared to be living magma contained within red rock-like armor, with a head engulfed in flames, heat blast. One of his oldest and most reliable transformations. The blue energy patterns manifested as circuit-like lines running through the magma, causing it to burn with unusual intensity and coloration. The amphisbaena hissed at this new threat, seeming to recognize the danger heat blast represented. It lunged forward with shocking speed for its size, jaws open to deliver a venomous bite. Heat blast met the charge with a massive fireball that exploded against the creature's open mouth, causing it to recoil with a shriek of pain. The flames, enhanced by the dungeon's magical energy, burned hotter than normal, partially melting the armored scales around the monster's face. Aim for the underbelly, Lyra called, firing arrows at the exposed sections as the creature writhed. The scales are thinner there. Heat blast nodded, generating a concentrated jet of flame directed at the amphisbaena's underside. The monster thrashed in pain, its tail sweeping across the tunnel and forcing Lyra to dive for cover. Despite its injuries, the creature showed no signs of retreating. If anything, it seemed to grow more aggressive, its movements becoming more erratic and dangerous. We need to end this quickly before it brings down the entire tunnel, Lyra warned, rolling to her feet and loosing another arrow that struck one of the monster's eyes, eliciting another shriek of rage. Heat blast assessed the situation with Ben's tactical mind. The confined space limited his mobility and risked collateral damage with too much firepower. He needed a more precise approach. I have an idea, he called to Lyra. But I need to switch forms. Can you keep it distracted for a few seconds? Consider it done, Lyra replied, immediately launching into action. She fired 3 arrows in rapid succession, each striking sensitive areas, the creature's remaining eye, a joint between armor plates, and the soft tissue inside its mouth. As it focused its rage on her, she moved with impressive agility, using the tunnel walls themselves as launching points to stay ahead of its strikes. Heat blast touched the Omnitrix symbol on his chest, triggering another transformation. Green light flashed, and in his place stood a tall, insectoid being with 4 arms, translucent wings, and a lean, mantis-like build. Stinkfly, but modified by the blue energy into something more elegant and deadly looking than his usual form. Perfect, Stinkfly buzzed, his wings vibrating as he took to the air in the limited space available. The Amphisbaena, temporarily blinded by Lyra's arrows, relied on other senses to track movement. Its head swiveling toward the sound of beating wings. I need to get to its underside, Stinkfly called to Lyra. The goop this form produces is normally just sticky, I'm betting the dungeon's energy has enhanced it. I'll create an opening, Lyra responded, understanding immediately. She reached into a pouch at her belt and withdrew what appeared to be a crystalline arrow with a glowing core. Knocking it to her bow, she waited for the perfect moment as the monster lunged toward Stinkfly's buzzing. Now, she shouted, loosing the special arrow. It struck the creature's chest and exploded in a flash of blinding light, causing the Amphisbaena to rear up reflexively, exposing its softer underside. Stinkfly dove into the opening, spraying a stream of green-ish liquid from his eye stalks directly onto the exposed flesh. The substance, now infused with blue energy patterns similar to those on his body, sizzled upon contact, eating through the monster's hide like acid. The Amphisbaena thrashed in agony, but the damage was done. Stinkfly continued spraying, focusing on a single point until he had created a hole large enough to expose the creature's magi. Sea stone, a crystal many times larger than those they had collected from lesser monsters. The stone, Lyra called, already knocking another arrow. If you can dislodge it, the creature will dissipate. Stinkfly maneuvered into position, all 4 arms gripping the edges of the hole he had created. With a powerful heave, he tore the opening wider, fully exposing the pulsing crystal embedded in the monster's chest cavity. Lyra's arrow flew true, striking the stone with enough force to crack it. The Amphisbaena froze mid-thrash, its body suddenly rigid. Then, with a sound like shattering glass, the magic stone broke apart entirely. And the massive creature began to dissolve into ash-like particles, starting from the wound and spreading outward. Stinkfly landed beside Lyra and transformed back to human form, breathing heavily from the exertion. That was intense and concerning, Lyra added, her professional demeanor returning now that the immediate danger had passed. Upper Floor B. Reaches by deep floor monsters are extremely rare, and this one appeared directly beneath us. Her silver eyes fixed on the Omnitrix, almost as if it was drawn to you. Ben looked down at the device, which had returned to its normal state, though the blue energy patterns seemed more integrated than before. You think the Omnitrix, or the Forbidden Core, somehow attracted it? It's a working theory, Lyra replied, already examining the hole in the floor where the Amphisbaena had emerged. The timing is too convenient to be coincidence. The dungeon is responsive to unusual energy signatures, Forbidden Core would certainly qualify. She knelt and carefully collected fragments of the monster's magic stone that hadn't completely disintegrated. We should bring these to Asteria for analysis, and mention this incident to NAIA. Her observations about changing energy patterns may be more significant than we realized. Ben nodded agreement, helping her gather the fragments. As they worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that the Omnitrix was somehow changing in response to this environment, not just drawing power from it, but integrating with it on a fundamental level. The implications were both fascinating and concerning. They made their way back toward the surface without further incident, though Ben noticed Lyra maintained a higher level of alertness than during their descent. Their adventurers they passed seemed unaware of any unusual activity, suggesting the Amphisbaena's appearance had indeed been an isolated event specifically connected to them. As they ascended the stairs back into Babel Tower, Ben caught Lyra studying him with an unreadable expression. What? He asked. You handled yourself exceptionally well, she said, her tone IGH praise indeed. Both in routine combat and during the crisis. Your transformations are impressive, but more importantly, you use them intelligently. Thanks, Ben replied, surprised by the compliment. You weren't exactly a slouch yourself. That shot to the monster's eye was incredible. A hint of a smile touched Lyra's lips. Years of practice. Her expression grew more serious. But this incident confirms we need to Approach your situation with greater caution. If the dungeon is reacting to your presence, more unusual encounters may follow. Story of my life, Ben sighed. Find a new world, attract the biggest, nastiest thing around. It's practically tradition at this point. They emerged into the bustling main floor of Babel Tower, the normality of adventurers going about their business a stark contrast to the battle they had just survived. Ben found the transition almost jarring, one moment fighting for their lives against a serpentine monstrosity, the next surrounded by people haggling over equipment prices and comparing magic stone halls. Welcome to an adventurer's life in Orario, Lyra commented, seeming to read his thoughts. Life-threatening danger one moment, mundane commerce the next. You adapt to the dichotomy eventually. I'm familiar with the concept, Ben assured her, thinking of how many times he'd saved the world only to worry about homework deadlines the next day. Though usually, there's more public recognition when I take down something that big. Would you prefer that? Lyra asked with genuine curiosity as they made their way through the crowd. Many adventurers seek fame as much as fortune. Ben considered the question honestly. Not really. Fame complicates things, makes it harder to just do the job without politics getting involved. Lyra nodded as if he'd confirmed something she'd suspected. A refreshing perspective. Too many adventurers forget that our purpose is to maintain the balance between the surface world and the dungeon, not to accumulate personal glory. They exited Babel Tower into the late afternoon sunlight, the city of Orario continuing its eternal bustle around them. After the confined space of the dungeon, the open sky and fresh air felt particularly welcome. We should report to Asteria first, Lyra decided, then visit NAIA as promised. The goddess will want to know about the Amphisbena immediately. As they turned toward the eastern district, neither noticed the figure watching them from the shadows of a nearby alleyway, a woman with intense eyes and a spear strapped to her back, her expression calculating as she observed Ben specifically. After a moment, she melted back into the shadows, moving with the practiced stealth of someone accustomed to remaining unseen when necessary. The audience with Goddess Asteria was brief but productive. The deity examined the Amphisbena stone fragments with evident concern, her star-filled eyes narrowing as she detected patterns invisible to mortal perception. The Dungio N recognizes the forbidden core as something both familiar and foreign, she explained after completing her examination. Like a melody it once knew but played in a different key. It is curious, testing boundaries, testing them with deadly monsters, Ben noted dryly. The dungeon speaks only through its creations, Asteria replied. And it is not malevolent so much as instinctually defensive. It perceives the forbidden core as a potential threat to its established order. She instructed Lyra to document the incident in detail for the Familia's archives and recommended that Ben avoid Vey. Entering beyond the 5th floor until they better understood the dungeon's reactions to his presence. With that guidance and a warning to remain vigilant, she dismissed them to continue their planned visit to Naya's workshop. The craftswoman's excitement upon their return was palpable. She practically bounced with eagerness as they described their expedition, her blue-green eyes widening dramatically at the mention of the Amphisbena. A 15th floor monster on the 3rd floor, she gasped, immediately abandoning her work to give them her full attention. That confirms my readings. The Dun Gion's energy patterns are shifting in unprecedented ways. She led them to a workbench covered in instruments resembling a cross between scientific equipment and magical artifacts. Various crystals pulsed with light, and floating above one device was what appeared to be a 3-dimensional map of energy flows. I've been tracking anomalies for weeks, NAIA explained, adjusting dials with practiced precision. Small at first, minor fluctuations in magic stone resonance, unusual monster behaviors reported by clients. But 3 days ago, there was a massive spike. She glanced at Ben. Around the time you arrived, I'm guessing. That would match our timeline, Lyra confirmed. And now this. NAIA continued, examining the Amphisbena fragments they had brought. The energy signature is L wrong for an upper floor manifestation. It's as if the dungeon's internal boundaries are becoming permeable. She turned to Ben with open fascination. May I? Just a basic analysis of your device. It might help explain what's happening. Ben hesitated, then extended his wrist, holding the Omnitrix where her instruments could detect it without allowing direct contact. Just readings. No physical interaction. Of course. NAIA agreed immediately, adjusting her equipment to focus on the device. Various crystals lit up in response, and the floating energy map reconfigured itself dramatically, forming new patterns centered around a pulsing point that obviously represented the Omnitrix. Extraordinary, she breathed, watching the readings with rapt attention. It's operating on multiple frequency layers simultaneously, some of which match our world's magical harmonics perfectly while others are completely foreign. Her fingers flew over various controls, recording data. The integration is accelerating too. Comparing current readings to the ambient traces from when you first entered my shop this morning, the synchronization has advanced by nearly 12%. Is that bad? Ben asked, concerned by her intensity. Not bad, necessarily, NAIA replied, not looking up from her instruments. Just unprecedented. Your device, the Omnitrix, it's adapting to our world's ICAL framework faster than any documented magical artifact in guild records. She finally met his eyes, her expression a mix of scientific fascination and genuine concern. It's as if it was designed to do this, to harmonize with different magical systems. That's not entirely wrong, Ben admitted carefully. The Omnitrix was created to adapt to different genetic codes. This is just a new application of that principle. NAIA nodded as if this confirmed her theories. Magical energy and biological patterns share fundamental similarities in our world. The dungeon generates monsters through a process that merges magical essence with physical forms. Your device may be recognizing those similarities and adjusting accordingly. She continued her analysis, recording data while explaining her findings in terms that occasionally went over Ben's head despite his years of exposure to advanced technology. Lyra, however, seemed to follow perfectly, asking pointed questions that revealed her own sophisticated understanding of magical theory. After nearly an hour of examination, NAIA finally powered down her instruments, looking both exhilarated and exhausted. I've never seen anything like it, she concluded. The integration patterns suggest your device will continue adapting to our world's energy systems, potentially unlocking new capabilities as it does so. That explains the enhanced transformations, Ben noted. Each form seems to gain abilities connected to this world's magic. Exactly, NAIA exclaimed, delighted by his understanding. It's incorporating fauna-like qualities into your transformations, despite you not having an actual divine blessing. Theoretically impossible, but, she gestured evidently not. She began organizing her notes with methodical precision despite her obvious excitement. With your permission, I'd like to design specialized equipment that complements these integration patterns. Nothing that interferes with the device itself, she added quickly, seeing Ben's expression. But items that might help stabilize the more volatile energy fluctuations, such as the ones that apparently attracted a 15th floor monster, Lyra pointed out. Precisely, NAIA agreed. Think of it as creating a buffer, allowing the beneficial adaptations while minimizing unintended consequences. Ben considered the proposal. NAIA clearly possessed both the expertise and enthusiasm to potentially help, and if the dungeon continued responding to his presence with increasingly dangerous monsters, some form of mitigation would be necessary. All right, he agreed, but we take it slow. One step at a time. Naya's face lit up with such pure joy that Ben couldn't help smiling in response. You won't regret it. I'll start with basic designs tonight and have preliminary schematics ready by tomorrow. This is going to be amazing. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and even Lyra's normally reserved expression softened slightly. As NAIA began gathering materials and sketching initial concepts, talking rapidly about compatibility matrices and resonance harmonics, Ben found himself genuinely impressed by her intellect and passion. She's something else, he commented quietly to Lyra as they watched the craftswoman work. NAIA sees the world differently than most, Lyra replied with evident fondness. Where others see limitations, she sees possibilities. It makes her brilliant at what she does, if sometimes, overwhelmingly enthusiastic. I like enthusiasm, Ben said, especially when backed by that level of brainpower. They spent another hour at the workshop, with NAIA occasionally pulling Ben into discussions about specific aspects of the Omnitrix's operation that he could safely share. Her questions were insightful and precise. demonstrating a genuine understanding of complex magical technological principles that impressed even Ben, who had worked with some of the greatest scientific minds across multiple galaxies. As evening approached, Lyra finally suggested they should return to the Asteria Familia compound to rest and process the day's events. NAIA reluctantly agreed that they had covered enough ground for one session. Extracting promises from Ben to return soon for equipment fitting and further analysis. "She'll work through the night now," Lyra predicted as they left the workshop, the sound of Naya's excited muttering following them into the street. "Once she has a new project, especially one this unprecedented, she loses all sense of time. Reminds me of my cousin Gwen when she's researching a new spell," Ben commented. A pang of homesickness briefly crossing his features. "Or my friend Blukik when he's working on a new invention." Though with about 1,000% more coherent explanations. They walked in companionable silence through the evening streets of Orario, the city transitioning from daytime commerce to nighttime entertainment. Taverns and food stalls opened their doors, lanterns with magical illumination cast warm light across the thoroughfares, and adventurers gathered to share stories of their dungeon exploits. "Hungry?" Lyra asked as they passed a particularly appetizing OD stall selling skewered meat glazed with some kind of sauce that made Ben's mouth water instantly. "Starving," he admitted. "Dungeon fighting really works up an appetite." They stopped for a quick meal, Lyra ordering selections that would introduce Ben to Orario's cuisine: tender meat from monsters raised specifically for food rather than from the dungeon itself, vegetables with unfamiliar but delicious flavors, and a sweet pastry filled with fruits that tasted similar to earth berries but with subtle differences. As they ate standing at a small counter, Ben noticed the easy way Lyra acted with the stall owner, respectful but genuine, without the formal distance she maintained in more official settings. It offered a glimpse of the person beneath the first-class adventurer persona. Someone who had relationships and connections throughout the city beyond her familia duties. "You know," Ben said between bites, "for someone who crashed into an alternate dimension less than a day ago, this is going surprisingly well. Usually there's more running for my life involved." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "You consider an Amphisbaena attack going well? One major monster, defeated with minimal collateral damage, and no civilians injured." Ben grinned. "By my standards, that's practically a vacation." A flicker of amusement crossed Lyra's features. "Your standards for going well concern me deeply." "They concerned my parents too," Ben replied with a self-deprecating shrug. "But you learn to measure success differently when you're regularly saving the world." Lyra studied him over her food, silver eyes assessing. "You say that so casually. Saving the world, as if it's an ordinary occurrence. In my line of work, it kind of is." Ben finished his skewer and wiped his hands on a provided cloth. "I didn't ask for the responsibility, but once you have the ability to help people on that scale, walking away isn't really an option." "A heavy burden for one person," Lyra observed. "I'm not alone," Ben clarified. "I have a team, a family who supports me. The Omnitrix may be attached to my wrist, but I've never really been solo." "Until now," Lyra pointed out quietly. The simple statement hit harder than Ben expected. He was indeed alone in this world, cut off from his support network, his family, his team. For all his experience and power, that isolation represents a vulnerability he rarely had to face. "Yeah," he acknowledged, his normally confident expression faltering slightly. "Until now." Lyra seemed to recognize the impact of her words. After a brief hesitation, she placed a hand on his shoulder, the first voluntary physical contact she had initiated. "The Asteria Familia has pledged its support, Ben Tennyson. You may be far from your team, but you are not without allies here." The gesture and words, simple as they were, provided genuine comfort. "Thanks, Lyra, that means a lot." They continued their meal in companionable silence, the bustling night life of Orario flowing around them. From a nearby tavern came laughter and song, adventurers celebrating successful expeditions or drowning the sorrows of failed ones. The normality of it all. People living their lives despite the dangerous dungeon beneath their feet, reminded Ben of his own world's resilience in the face of constant threats. As they finally turned toward the Eastern District and the Asteria Familia compound, Ben noticed a flicker of movement on a rooftop across the street. a silhouette briefly visible against the night sky before disappearing. His instincts, honed through years of combat situations, immediately went on alert. "We're being watched," he said quietly to Lyra, not breaking stride or giving any obvious indication he had noticed. To her credit, Lyra didn't react visibly either, continuing their casual pace while her eyes scanned their surroundings with practiced subtlety. "Since the food stall, or before?" "Just noticed it now," Ben replied, impressed by her immediate tactical assessment. "Rooftop across the street, moving parallel to us. Single observer, from what I can tell. Could be guild surveillance," Lyra suggested. "Your demonstrati on this morning would have triggered standard monitoring protocols for unusual abilities. Could also be a rival familia assessing recruitment potential. Or something connected to the Forbidden Core," Ben added. "My experience says coincidences are rarely actually coincidental." They maintained their pace, neither acknowledging their awareness of the observer nor attempting to lose them. If it was official guild surveillance, evasive action would only heighten suspicion. If it missed her, better to confront it in a location of their choosing rather than being caught off guard later. As they approached the Eastern District, the buildings became more elegant and widely spaced, with fewer shadowy alleys and hidden observation points, a security feature of the wealthier area that worked to their advantage now. Their pursuer would have fewer places to conceal themselves. Sure enough, as they turned onto a broad avenue lined with magical lighting, the shadowy figure appeared to withdraw wrath. Then exposed themselves in the well-lit thoroughfare. Ben caught a final glimpse, a feminine silhouette with what appeared to be a weapon strapped to her back, before the observer disappeared completely. "Female, armed with what looked like a polearm," he reported quietly. "Definitely not guild-issue equipment from what I could see." Lyra's expression tightened slightly. "There are several FAML IAS who specialize in reconnaissance and information gathering. This level of interest after just one day in Orario suggests your abilities have already attracted significant attention. Should we be concerned?" Ben asked as they approached the Asteria Familia compound, its silver domes gleaming in the moonlight. "Vigilant, certainly," Lyra replied. "Though the Asteria Familia's territory is well protected, and few would risk confrontation with us directly." She glanced at him with a hint of dry humor. "Besides, anyone who witnessed your guild demonstration would think twice about attacking. Someone who can transform into a blue speedster creature. XLR8, Ben supplied automatically. "And that's just one of my more moderate forms." They reached the compound gates, where the guards nodded respectfully to Lyra and acknowledged Ben with less suspicion than they had shown that morning. Word of his official acceptance by Asteria had clearly spread throughout the Familia. Inside, the atrium was quieter than it had been during daylight hours, though still populated by Familia members engaged in various activities, scholars studying star charts, adventurers maintaining equipment, and what appeared to be a class of younger members practicing meditation techniques beneath one of the crystal domes. "You should rest," Lyra advised as they crossed the atrium. "Today involved significant physical and magical exertion, and tomorrow will likely bring new challenges." Ben couldn't argue with that assessment. Despite his experience and stamina, the dimensional transition, dungeon exploration, and multiple transformations had taken their toll. The comfortable guest quarters assigned to him seemed increasingly appealing. "What about our shadow?" he asked as they ascended the spiral staircase toward the residential wing. "I'll inform our sentries to maintain heightened alert," Lyra replied. "And I'll report the observation to Asteria. If someone is taking specific interest in you beyond normal curiosity, we should know their identity and intentions." They reached the corridor leading to Ben's quarters, pausing at the intersection where their paths would diverge. "Thank you," Ben said, meeting Lyra's silver eyes directly, "for the guidance today, and for taking my situation seriously from the beginning. Not everyone would have shown that level of trust to someone who paired out of nowhere and turned into an alien dinosaur." A hint of a smile touched Lyra's lips. "The Asteria Familia's purpose is to study cosmic phenomena and protect Orario from dimensional threats. You presented an excellent opportunity to do both simultaneously." The smile deepened slightly, becoming more genuine. "Besides, anyone who faces an amphisbena with that level of composure deserves some benefit of the doubt." She turned to leave, then paused, looking back over her shoulder. "Rest well, Ben Tennyson." Orario has taken notice of you now. Tomorrow will undoubtedly bring new challenges. With that, she departed, her footsteps fading down the corridor. Ben made his way to his quarters, the events of the day replaying in his mind. In less than 24 hours, he had been transported to another dimension. Registered as an adventurer, explored a monster-filled dungeon, fought a creature that shouldn't have been there, and apparently attracted enough attention to warrant surveillance. Just another day in the life, he murmured to himself as he entered his room, the Omnitrix pulsing gently on his wrist as if in agreement. From the window, he could see the enormous silhouette of Babel Tower against the night sky, and below it, the entrance to the dungeon, a place of mystery and danger that somehow recognized the forbidden core integrated with the Omnitrix. What that connection meant, and how it might affect his chances of returning home, remained to be seen. As exhaustion claimed him, Ben's last conscious thought was of the familiar silhouette watching from the rooftop, a shadowy observer whose identity and intentions would soon become clear, for better or worse. In a world of gods, monsters, and magic, the appearance of the Forbidden Core had set events in motion that would reshape not just Ben's fate, but potentially the future of Orario itself. Chapter 2 End. The End. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.